it's game over. The city that is behind of me will never be again divided.
اتصلوا علينا اتصالات افزع يا ابو عنان بارك فيها مليان مستوطنين.
في ناس باعتهم الدار اعطوهم المفتاح قالوا لهم تفضلوا.
أنا لم أقم ببيع البيت مطلقاً.
أنا مش مجنون إني أجي أبيعهم مثلاً للمستوطنين امبارح وأدخلهم اليوم.
الطرق اللي بيستعملوها طرق خسيسة جداً، يجب فضح هاي السياسة الإسرائيلية في كل العالم.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of the holiest sites in Christianity. It sits in the middle of the Old City in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem. Adib Judeh is known across the city as the man who holds the keys to the church, an honorable role his family has held for hundreds of years. So when Palestinians heard that a property he owned in the Old City, a house that was serving as a community clinic, had been sold to a settler organization, they were enraged.
People are telling me they're setting you up. You're the weakest link and the rope's going around your neck. Why would the rope go around my neck? I have all my paperwork and documents. I'm not crazy. I wouldn't sell it to settlers one day and move them in on the next.
The vast majority of East Jerusalem's residents are Palestinians. But those demographics are changing with the gradual inflow of Israeli settlers into its Palestinian areas. Settlers are ideologically driven Jewish Israelis who have been acquiring Palestinian homes in East Jerusalem since the 1980s. These homes are taken with the help of Israeli laws and policies that leave Palestinians vulnerable to pressure and exploitation. According to Israel's master plan for the city, only 12% of the land in East Jerusalem is allocated for Palestinian construction, and it's mostly already built up. So many Palestinians are forced to build their homes without a permit, which is illegal.
When a Palestinian in Jerusalem builds a house without a permit, he spends his power, energy, and money going into debt just to build a home. And then the municipality of Jerusalem starts issuing demolition orders to bring the homeowner to court, and imposes huge fines, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, on someone who is already financially overburdened with debt. This is one of the pressure tactics that the occupation uses to pursue the Palestinian.
Facing such financial pressure, many Palestinians have been choosing to sell their homes to other Palestinians. Selling a home to Jews is taboo in the community since it contributes to Israel's continued illegal expansion into Palestinian land. But in recent years, settler organizations have found a way around that.
And we are approaching them using sometimes Arab names. And in these cases, some of them don't know that it's us behind of the Arab name.
Settlers have been sending brokers to buy houses from Palestinians on their behalf. These brokers are usually Palestinians that settler organizations pay large sums in return for buying the houses. In the case of the Judeh house, there were several Arab names involved.
The house had been up for sale since 2012. A lot of people approached us to buy it. But anyone that we felt was suspicious, I wouldn't even sit down with.
Attempts to buy the house started in 2013, when Fadi Salamin, a prominent Palestinian businessman living in the US, claimed he was buying the house to stop it from going to settlers. But he needed financial backing.
First door I knocked on was the UAEs, and they helped a lot.
Fadi Salamin came to us and we wrote up a sale deal. But something happened and he couldn't make the full payment. So we nullified the deal through the central court.
Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar reported that Salamin was buying the house with money from the UAE to sell it to settlers. The Palestinian Authority, or PA, froze the West Bank account Salamin was using to buy the home, stopping the deal. Salamin is said to have ties to Mohammed Dahlan, who's PA President Mahmoud Abbas's political rival, and an advisor to UAE Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed.
The only people who stood in my way and stopped me from protecting that house were people from the PA. There was no reason for them to stop me. The only reason was that I speak out against their corruption and continue to.
Once the Salamin deal fell through, another buyer stepped forward, Khalid al-Atari.
I spoke to the governor at the time, Adnan al-Husseini, and he spoke well of him. I spoke to a number of Palestinians, and they spoke well of Khalid al-Atari. They said, proceed. Hopefully it will go well, since the man has money and is from Jerusalem. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, they were wrong.
On October 5th, 2018, settlers moved into the house in the middle of the night. News broke that, in fact, the home that had been sold to al-Atari had been bought by a settler organization through an intermediary, an unknown offshore company called Daho Holdings Limited.
I did not sell the house at all. One accusation, it was a joint effort between Al-Salamin and Judah. Adib Judah and him were looking for someone respectable who would be cleared by the people of Jerusalem. So they tricked me and put me in this mess.
Judah gave us a sale agreement made between him and al-Atari. But al-Atari showed us a document that transfers the power to act on behalf of the property from the Judah family directly to Daho Holdings.
That company belongs to him, this Daho. If my name is mentioned anywhere in connection to this company, then I am responsible.
Documents obtained from the Israeli Land Registry show that ownership of the house was registered under al-Atari on the 23rd of April and then transferred to Daho Holdings on the same day, and show al-Atari as the signatory on behalf of the company. On the other side of the wall separating East Jerusalem from the West Bank is the PA's Ministry for Jerusalem Affairs. A few years ago, Palestinian homeowners started going to the ministry to get clearance on potential buyers from Palestinian intelligence in hopes of preventing their houses from going to settlers.
The person selling their house brings a letter to the governorate. It's a matter of security. The governorate gives the name of the potential buyer to the intelligence services. They do the necessary research and bring it back to the ministry, after which we give approval, conditional approval.
But several brokers have gotten that clearance, including Khalid al-Atari. Haaretz newspaper reported that al-Atari had a close relationship with Majid Faraj, the head of the PA's intelligence. The former governor of Jerusalem under the PA, Adnan al-Husseini, had also signed off on the deal between the two.
They work in illicit selling. They make it seem like they're in real estate and that they're buying for themselves, but they're actually just brokers for certain parties. They pay to register properties in their name, and then they transfer them. They're Arabs that are buying, but in the end, they're illicitly transferring to other parties.
The PA announced that it was forming a committee of inquiry to look into the matter, and its ruling party, Fatah, denied any involvement in brokering the sale. But the people of Jerusalem decided to look into the PA, with Judah and al-Atari present.
ليش؟ انتوا بدكم تشكلوا لجنة تحقيق يا كذابين يا مفترين. طب كل العقارات هسه اعطوني انتوا ملف انتوا اصدرتوا فيه ووينه؟ كل يوم بيصدر عقارات.
Khalid al-Atari stopped returning our calls. Using Palestinian brokers is a relatively new method, but settler organizations have been acquiring Palestinian property for years.
Israelis are buying in East Jerusalem not just now. The movement of buying property in East Jerusalem is for almost more than 30 years.
There are two main settler organizations Judaizing East Jerusalem, Ataret Kohanim and Elad. Ataret Kohanim is the organization that bought the Judah house. It focuses on the old city of Jerusalem. Elad works in Silwan, a Palestinian neighborhood it claims is home to the biblical City of David. It's no coincidence that both areas are right next to Al-Aqsa Mosque. The mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. It's a symbol of presence, steadfastness, and struggle to Palestinians not just in Jerusalem, but all over. It's also the symbol of East Jerusalem, the supposed capital of any future Palestinian state. The Judah House was just 350 meters from the mosque, and this one is less than 1 kilometer away, but in Silwan. It was taken by settlers just days before the Judah House.
This area, they claim it's the city of David. But the Prophet David has nothing to do with this. Nothing at all.
My wife called and told me that the settlers came into the house with police and threw my family out. I got here and asked if we could go inside, but they said no, that they wouldn't let us in, not even to take our things. Nothing. So here we are, still waiting.
Settler organizations are ideologically driven, with a goal to return the Jewish people to what they claim is their biblical land. That overlaps with the Israeli state's goal of establishing a Jewish demographic majority in Jerusalem.
Since its occupation of Jerusalem in 1967, the Israeli occupation has tried to empty Jerusalem of its people and to build the legitimate legal grounds that will enable it, when the time is right, to confiscate Palestinian properties.
Several laws are in place to leave Palestinian homes in the city vulnerable to settler acquisition.
Every one of these associations is responsible for one of the areas, whether inside the old city or in the surrounding neighborhoods. They focus on taking over houses through the absentee property law, laws about properties being Jewish-owned before 1948, and the third generation law, where after the death of a grandfather, father, and son, the property goes to the Israeli state.
The absentee property law, for example, says that the state can confiscate a property if its owner was outside Israel's self-claimed borders in 1948. Since all of East Jerusalem was under Jordanian rule at that time, that law applies to most properties in that part of the city. And once a property is confiscated, it's often then sold to settler organizations. Whatever the law or policy, it's crafted to push Palestinians out of their homes to make way for Jewish ownership or construction, all while appearing untargeted and purely legal.
I went out and came back to find that special forces, settlers, Elad, and the Nature Authority had come and taken the house.
Elad and Ataret Kohanim get help in confiscating Palestinian homes and lands from the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Housing and Construction, the Ministry of Antiquities, and the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority. Settlers are known to attack Palestinians and are rarely held accountable. The man driving the car is the head of the Elad settler organization, David Berry. He won the Israel Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. Settler outposts in the Old City and Silwan litter the areas with surveillance cameras and private security guards who often harm or kill Palestinians and get away with it, claiming they felt unsafe. The guards are paid for by the housing ministry and cost tens of millions of dollars a year. But most of the settler organization's financial support comes from outside Israel.
From private people that wants to take part in this idea, in this ideology, this movement. People from Israel, people from overseas, they want to participate in that.
Elad and Ataret Kohanim have been getting millions of dollars in foreign donations for years. Most come from wealthy Jews like the now-deceased Irving Moskowitz, US-based NGOs, and companies registered in tax havens like Daho Holdings. But in recent years, other Arab benefactors have been tied to these organizations too. Before the details of the Judah House sale became clear, the deputy head of the Islamic movement in Israel, Kamal al-Khatib, said Emiratis were involved in brokering the deal.
I do not hesitate in saying and confirming, today and tomorrow, in front of God and our people, that Emirati businessmen are behind this deal. And there is no doubt that they got help from certain Palestinians, who helped them pass these deals through.
They want the Palestinians to be involved in selling real estate, houses and land in Jerusalem. So in the future, if there is somebody to blame for losing Jerusalem, it's to blame Palestinians, not the Gulf states or other Arab states.
And this isn't the first time individuals tied to the UAE have come up.
I live on the 4th floor. The home that was sold is on the 3rd floor.
In 2012, Nasser Sirhan posted an advertisement offering to sell the apartment below his in Silwan. And he did, to a Palestinian. And then in 2014, new tenants moved in overnight.
They didn't crawl through a window. Okay, they're settlers. But did they enter by force? No, they didn't come by breaking in. People sold them the house, gave them the key, and told them to enter.
He's not the only one. Settlers moved into around 25 properties in Silwan that night. Do you know who you rented it from? Do you have the name? Meilad? Palestinians in the area had all sold their properties to one of two Palestinian brokers who had both been cleared by Palestinian intelligence. Shamsuddin al-Qawasmi was one of them, and he claimed to be buying the property on behalf of individuals in the UAE.
So one day, the guy from the Alqam family calls me and tells me, this guy, Al-Qawasmi, who's living next to you, seems off. I asked him why, and he said he bought a home in the Rajabi building that's not even worth 80,000 dinars and paid 3 times as much for it, saying he wanted to buy it for the UAE. A week later, I asked Shams if he had bought a house in the area. At first, he denied it. Then he admitted that he bought it for the Emirates. I asked him, what would the UAE want with it? He said they wanted it to build a kindergarten or a clinic or something. I told him that home is going to end up with a settlers, Shams.
We tried reaching Al-Qawasmi, but he never returned our calls. The apartment Al-Qawasmi bought ended up going to settlers. So did one of Baidoun's own properties. His son had sold it to the other Palestinian broker behind the 2014 deals, Farid Haj Yahya. He sold most of the houses in the area to settlers, and he was known to work for an Emirati charity organization and was seen around Al-Aqsa often.
Farid
Haj Yahya came to us to rent the top floor from us. He wanted to make it into an office and into living quarters for Indian, Malaysian and Indonesian pilgrims coming from abroad. He said that these pilgrims are usually put in Israeli hotels, but that he'd like to rent our place instead, so that they'd be closer to Al-Aqsa Mosque.
أنا كنت في جلسة في مركز المعلومات في سلوان وادي حلوة قبل 10 أيام اللي من أجل ماذا؟ من أجل تقديم $500,000 لبناء مدرسة لأهالي سلوان. منين هاي المصاري يا أخوي؟ هذه من شخصيات عالمية وشخصيات عربية من أبو ظبي كمان حتى من أبو ظبي.
We were able to reach Yahya, who denied the accusations against him and said he'd show us documents proving he didn't sell any homes to settlers. But he didn't show up for our interview and stopped returning our calls.
A Jerusalemite is approached by a party that wants to buy their property only after they've been worn out by various pressures, and once they can no longer manage the financial burden on them. So when an Emirati organization, for example, offers to purchase their property, they see an Arab organization that could help them get out of the mess they're in.
The PA announced it would investigate the matter, but didn't follow up with any findings. It's a whole operation. One party has the money and sends a broker who can be cleared by Palestinian intelligence. They buy the property, then sell it to settlers.
The tragedy we live in is that we have no one to turn to. No one is responsible. Anyone can sell, everyone can do whatever they want. There is no responsible authority we can go to for help. I have documents and papers, but who can I take them to? Let's not kid ourselves.
Jerusalemites are frustrated with the PA for not only vouching for the buyers of the houses, but also concealing the findings of past investigations.
The PA gave him permission to buy and gave me permission to sell, so they're supposed to handle this and bring him to justice.
But the PA has no jurisdiction over Jerusalem because of the 1993 Oslo Accords, which limited their powers.
The 13th of September 1993 is the day that we signed the Oslo Accords, which stated that we could not negotiate the status of Jerusalem for 5 years. 5 years on, then 5 more, and 5 more. We're now almost 25 years on, and we still haven't talked about Jerusalem. In the meantime, the scourge of Judaization and settlement has been working day and night.
These brokers either have Israeli citizenship or Jerusalem IDs. According to the arrangement between us and Israel, we can't arrest them. If we were to arrest them, they would besiege Ramallah the next day.
We should be careful, but who should take care of the situation? The authority is not interested. They just talk over the mass media, they talk on the television that they are against the Judaization of Jerusalem, against the American embassy in Jerusalem, but do they do something real in the field? Are they adopting some practical measures to prevent the passing of land and houses to the Israelis?
Settlers continue to move into Palestinian neighborhoods all over the city. Their presence becomes a fact on the ground that complicates any future negotiations on occupied East Jerusalem, the intended capital of a future Palestinian state. In Silwan, there are now more than 70 settler outposts, and in the Old City, more than 80. Government-built settlements continue to expand across the rest of the city. And the Palestinians in Jerusalem are left to fend for themselves.